Want to advertise your business in a cost-effective way? It's time to give podcast advertising a try. Research shows a high rate of podcast listeners made a purchase as a result of an ad they heard on a podcast. Visit podbean.com/brands to launch a cost-effective podcast advertising campaign in minutes. That's podbean.com/brands.
Lady Justice is a true crime podcast, therefore deals with incidents of violence, disturbing imagery, and explicit content. Listener discretion is advised. The Lady Justice podcast wishes to offer their deepest condolences to the victims' families and wishes to offer thanks to those that work in emergency services. Hello my lovelies, and welcome to an extra special bonus Halloween minisode of Lady Justice. My name is Chantel and I'm your friendly true crime addict with slight caffeine addiction issues. Not much talking beforehand this time, but please remember to share this podcast with your friends, subscribe, rate and leave a review, hopefully positive. As always, all my sources are linked in the show notes. I have to give credit to the True Crime Enthusiast as he has a brilliant blog entry on his website that makes for excellent follow-up reading about this case. So let's just jump straight in and get on it like a car bonnet. Bristol, in the southwest of England, boasts one of the country's oldest public parks, known as Brandon Hill, where you can enjoy fabulous views of the city. It is located just off Park Street, close to the city centre. It's quite a lovely place to go for a walk and features a children's playground and a nature conservation area that covers a region of around 2 hectares. Early on November 1st, 1980, a 24-year-old nurse was due to begin her shift at St Mary's, a local hospital. She was walking down a path between Berkeley Square and Brandon Hill Lane. In the early morning dawn light, she could just make out a figure laid out on the ground some distance in front of her. As an experienced nurse, she instinctively headed towards the person. It could have easily been someone who had overdone it the night before in the nearby nightclubs and was just sleeping the evening's antics off. However, as she got closer, she realised the person was laid in a vast pool of blood. She rushed over and looked for signs of life. Feeling for a pulse unsuccessfully, she rang for the police and paramedics to be in attendance. They were on the scene quickly, and by first light they were able to establish the gravity of the attack that the body laid on the ground had endured. The man that had been found, lying face down in the grass, had sustained multiple injuries to the head and body. His jacket had been ripped from his torso, and the contents of his wallet, such as bank and credit cards, were scattered around the body. No obvious murder weapon was found in the immediate area of the crime scene, and a murder investigation was launched. Over 40 officers were tasked with firstly trying to identify the man that had been found just inside the entrance of Brandon Hill Park. The police were quickly able to discern the name of the murdered man as the 39-year-old Derek Grain. Originally from the Hertfordshire area, he was working in a temporary position as an aerospace engineer for British Aerospace located in the nearby town of Filton. He had never been married or had children, but he was well liked and respected by the small group of family, friends and colleagues that were acquainted with him. Described by those that knew him, he was a bit of a loner who was cheerful and kind, willing to help those that he could, and we all know someone like that, don't we? It was also noted that Derek was the kind of man that liked to drink or two. This being said, however, the head of the department that Derek was working for told reporters at the time he was not the kind of person to get mixed up in brawls in pubs or nightclubs. Derek Grain had been staying at the Unicorn Hotel. He'd been residing there since his arrival in Bristol 2 months previously. His Ford Fiesta car was still parked up in the hotel as it had done since 4 p.m. the day before. Interviews were conducted with workmates and those that had gotten to know Derek whilst he was in Bristol. Much to the frustrations of police, nothing appeared unusual about the man who had been viciously beaten to death. He had no enemies and he wasn't involved in anything underhand. A murder committed by a stranger is much more uncommon and much more likely to go unsolved. The movements of Derek were the next on the police's checklist. hoping that they could create a timeline of the night's events and find any possible witnesses. Thankfully, Derek's distinctive dark beard made him quite memorable. Bristol city centre was frequented more than usual that Friday evening. The Halloween festivities meant that many of the nightclubs and bars had special events on. Derek was remembered to be seen at least 2 nightclubs on Park Street on the 31st. The first nightclub was Ficky's, an old strip joint at 44 Park Street, with an entrance price of just 10p. Bar staff and other partygoers had told police that he was a pleasant man who had a lot of cash. He paid for each of his drinks with a different note, making him noticeable. A pint in 1980 was only about 35 pence. Now imagine that, it's just about £1.10 today. Derek then, at some point in the evening, moved further down Park Street to the Curves nightclub. Still flashing the cash, he was said to leave alone at around 2 a.m. when the doors closed. Witnesses reported to police that Derek had then started to walk towards the Brandon Hill area. This is something that confused police. The Unicorn Hotel that he'd been staying at was located a mile away, in the opposite direction. It made no sense that Derek would walk towards the park. He'd been a regular at the Park Street drinking establishments for the past 2 months, and it was most likely that he would not really misjudge his way home. Going back to the crime scene, just to the rear of 8 Berkeley Square, forensic officers worked tirelessly to document the scene. Investigators began to comb the area for clues, and 73 metres away, they found what they believed to be the murder weapon: a sand-filled traffic cone. There was no reason for the traffic cone, that had become stained with Derek Rain's blood, to be in the park. The torn clothing was tested, but unfortunately, this was before DNA testing, so not much could be attained. The inner lining and pockets had been ripped, suggesting that the victim may have been grabbed and something forcibly taken from his person. A post-mortem on Derek suggested that he died due to trauma suffered by multiple blunt force injuries, not only inflicted by the traffic cone. The pathologist believed that it was also likely that as Derek laid on the cold floor, he was kicked around the face and body. It was also concluded that the attack was carried out from behind. Derek may never have noticed he was being stalked. It was a most brutal attack. So, now on to motives. There seemed to be none from his personal life, as we've previously discussed. A theory suggested by Detective Inspector Brian Theobald, who led the 40-man inquiry, said, "There is a possibility that more than one person was involved in this. I'm pretty satisfied that the motive was robbery. They used an awful lot of violence. It was a particularly vicious and brutal murder." When Derek had left the last nightclub, Curves, at the end of the night, it was thought he had around £50 to £60 on him. That was a considerable amount of money to have, totalling around £215 to £255 a day. Robbery could have most certainly been the motive for the attack. Police followed this thought and worked on the assumption that Derek had been seen flashing the cash at the clubs. He was then followed until the intoxicated man was alone and away from witnesses, and then attacked. Police had also thought, due to the high amount of blood at the scene, it would be highly unlikely that the perpetrator or perpetrators of this murder would not be covered in blood splatter. On Halloween night though, when many are dressed up and fake blood is the norm, how would anyone tell the difference? Appeals were made to the public regarding anyone that was in the general area of the park and the surrounding streets. In the early days, several witnesses came forward. Some stated to police that they'd seen 3 or 4 men assaulting a lone man near the Clifton Triangle area, close to the park, at about 3 a.m. A caller who did not wish to identify himself to police reported that he had seen the fight that was confirmed by other witnesses. He also gave additional information about a red Jaguar car parked close to the crime scene. This was not the only sighting of the car though. Another witness that had called the local newspaper offices from Reading had also reported the vehicle. The callers had described the car in detail, and it was therefore easily traced. The vehicle was registered to an owner in Hitchin, Derek Gaines' hometown. They were interviewed by detectives, but they were found to have a solid alibi and nowhere near Bristol at the time of the attack. 5 youths found walking down Park Street at 2:30 a.m. wearing tall witches' hats and capes were tracked down by police, but they did not prove to be of any assistance to the investigation. Witnesses also informed police of a foreign-looking man who was seen running across the top of Queen's Road near the park at the time of the murder, but he was never traced. Despite police efforts and a £500 reward being put up by the club, not many more people came forward, and the leads provided by the public didn't pan out. Advances in forensic science over the years haven't managed to cast any more light on the murder, one significant bit of evidence being a footprint in blood on the back of Derek's shirt has yet to yield any new information. Analysis of the traffic cone has provided little useful information. In 2009, the pockets of Derek's clothes were scoured in the hopes of finding DNA in the form of skin cells left by whoever had killed him, but this, too, had proven fruitless. The case remains unsolved. Now, Halloween gives us a creative license to explore that darker side of ourselves. We get to dress up and be somebody else for the night. For the murderer or murderers of Derek Grain, when they woke up in the morning and saw their mask was removed and their face paint was washed off, when they looked in the mirror, they were still a cold-blooded murderer. I know this case is 39 years old now, the same age as Derek was when he was killed. Likely it will be forever unsolved. But if you do have any information at all, please contact Crime Stoppers or the Avon and Somerset Police Force with what you know. Their information is provided in the show notes. So that is it for me. Have a happy Halloween, keep yourself safe, and remember, go be good people, go be kind, go be safe, and most importantly, go be happy. Toodle pip and cheerio.